It all started with one comment that set the entire hip-hop world on fire. Jim Jones, the Harlem rapper known for his bold talk and unfiltered energy, went live and dropped a statement that fans still can't stop debating. With the camera rolling and thousands of viewers watching, Jim looked dead into the lens and said, "Ain't nobody in the streets playing Nas right now?" That one sentence flipped the culture upside down. How could someone from Dipset, a crew once known for their respect for East Coast legends, take a shot at a pioneer like Nas? The man behind Illmatic, One Mic, Ether, one of the most respected lyricists alive. Fans flooded the comments, calling Jim delusional, disrespectful, and even career suicidal. But for Jim, it wasn't about disrespect, it was about relevance. He claimed he was just speaking facts, saying the streets don't move to Nas anymore. Still, hip-hop purists weren't trying to hear that. Was Jim just chasing clout? Or did he actually speak a truth that rappers are too afraid to admit? Because what started as a harmless livestream suddenly turned into a cultural war. Old school lyricism versus new school hustle. Legacy versus relevance, and now. Everyone's picking sides. The live stream started like any other. Jim Jones was chilling in his chair, shades on, surrounded by that Harlem energy he always carried with him. He was talking casually with his followers, cracking jokes, and giving his opinion on the state of hip-hop. But that night, there was something different in his tone, a little sharper, a little more confident. And then he dropped the line that would shake social media for days. "Yo, I don't care what y'all say," Jim said, leaning toward the camera. "Ain't nobody in the streets bumping Nas right now." That one sentence hit the internet like a bomb. Fans froze, replayed the clip, and instantly started arguing about what they'd just heard. Within minutes, that moment was everywhere. On Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Blogs reposted it, podcasts were reacting, and the comment sections were on fire. People couldn't believe Jim had just said that about one of the greatest lyricists to ever touch a mic. But to understand why this moment exploded the way it did, you have to remember who Jim Jones is and what he represents. He's not just some rapper chasing clout. He's Harlem through and through, the hustler from Dipset, the crew that defined New York swagger in the early 2000s when Cam'ron, Juelz Santana, and Jim dropped their hits. The whole city felt alive again. They brought color, energy, and that fearless confidence back to the game. Jim wasn't the lyrical one. He was the businessman, the street mind, the one who turned hustle into an identity. And then there's Nas, the poet from Queensbridge, the man behind Illmatic, one of the greatest albums in hip-hop history. Where Jim came from the block, Nas came from the book. His words sharp like scripture, his flow calm but commanding. Nas represents the essence of what rap was built on: storytelling, struggle, and truth. So when Jim Jones said nobody in the streets plays Nas, it wasn't just a random comment. It was Harlem versus Queens, swagger versus soul, the new era versus the old guard. Clips of the live were reposted hundreds of times. Fans split instantly. Some said Jim was right. You don't hear Nas in the clubs. Don't hear him at parties. And that's just the reality of today's culture. Others fired back saying, "Bro, Nas just dropped back-to-back Grammy-level albums. Don't disrespect the legend." That's when things started getting personal. People accused Jim of being jealous, of using Nas's name to stay relevant. Others defended him, saying he was only being honest. But the problem wasn't the point he made. It was how he said it. There was arrogance in his tone, a lack of reverence for someone who helped build the path he now walks on. Because in hip-hop, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. The streets don't forget tone. And Jim's tone sounded like disrespect. Within hours, radio hosts, journalists, and even other rappers began weighing in. Some of the OG DJs said you can't measure Nas with street plays. You measure him with influence. Fans started posting old Nas verses as proof of his greatness, while younger fans argued that the game had moved on. Even Dipset fans looked confused. Many of them respected Nas and couldn't understand why Jim would poke that bear. Cameron, known for speaking his mind, stayed quiet but liked a few shady posts online, and that silence said a lot. And then came 50 Cent, never one to miss a chance at chaos. He posted a meme with a caption, "You can't talk about a legend unless you got classics yourself." That alone reignited the fire. Suddenly, it wasn't just a comment, it became a full-blown cultural debate. A few days later, Jim tried to explain himself. He went live again and said, "Y'all twisting my words. I didn't say Nas ain't a legend. I just said you don't hear Nas in the streets like that. There's a difference between being respected and being relevant." But at that point, it was too late. The internet doesn't care about context, only headlines. And Jim Jones says Nas is irrelevant was a headline too juicy to let go. Fans started trolling him, flooding his comments with Nas lyrics. Some even made edits of Jim rapping over Nas beats, captioned, "Nobody in the streets plays this." Nas didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to. His silence was its own statement. He's not part of that online noise. He moves with legacy, not trends. His fans did the talking for him, sharing clips of his sold-out shows, his speeches, his albums. They reminded everyone that Nas doesn't chase relevance, he defines. What made this situation fascinating was how it exposed the deeper tension in hip-hop, the eternal clash between the streets and the scholars, between the old and the new. Jim represents the grind era, flashy, aggressive, built on survival and hustle. Nas represents the wisdom era, lyrical precision, depth, and purpose. One's about motion, the other's about message. When Jim said nobody plays Nas in the streets, he wasn't entirely wrong. The sound of the streets has changed. Drill, trap, and melodic rap dominate the block now. Nas's music doesn't fit that vibe, but that doesn't make it any less important. If anything, it shows how hip-hop has evolved. The problem is, evolution doesn't erase history, and history is where Nas reigns supreme. The irony is that Jim, by trying to prove a point about relevance, ended up reminding everyone why Nas's legacy is untouchable. The man's influence runs too deep to be measured by club spins or playlists. Every serious rapper alive today owes something to him, whether they admit it or not. As the dust settled, P began asking a deeper question. Why did Jim feel the need to say it? Was it a genuine opinion, or was he trying to stir up attention in a world where controversy sells more than music? Maybe it was both. Maybe he really believed it, or maybe he just wanted to make headlines. But one thing was clear, the moment he said those words, he entered a conversation he couldn't control. Because when you speak on Nas, you're not just talking about a rapper, you're talking about hip-hop royalty. And disrespecting royalty always comes with consequences. By the end of that week, the clip had millions of views. Jim Jones had everyone's attention, but not in the way he planned. He tried to explain, backpedal, and move on, but the quote had already become part of hip-hop history. Whether you agreed or not, you remembered it. And in a strange way, maybe that was the point. Maybe Jim knew exactly what he was doing. Because even if nobody in the streets plays Nas, everybody online was definitely talking about Jim Jones. When the storm around Jim Jones's comments started to settle, it wasn't silence that followed, it was more noise. The kind of noise that builds careers, destroys reputations, and turns opinions into trending topics. Every hip-hop podcast was dissecting the moment, breaking down every word, every gesture, and even the tone of Jim's voice. Some said he was simply stating an uncomfortable truth, that Nas, for all his lyrical greatness, wasn't dominating the block anymore. But others felt it was more than that. They believed it was another case of a rapper underestimating the power of legacy. Jim's name was everywhere. And like always, he knew how to use controversy to his advantage. He didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down, appearing in interviews and talking about how the game had changed. Look, he said on one podcast, Nas is a legend, no doubt. But if you pull up in Harlem, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, they're not bumping Nas, bro. They are, and in a way, he was right. The sound of the streets had evolved. Hip-hop wasn't about deep lyricism anymore. It was about energy, motion, lifestyle, and social media moments. The generation that once memorized every Nas bar was older. Now they respected the art. The younger crowd wanted something they could post, dance to, and feel instantly. That's not Nas's lane. But that doesn't erase his power. The tension between relevance and respect is one of the oldest in hip-hop. Every generation faces it. The pioneers build the foundation, and the new wave comes through, flips the style, and claims they're the new voice of the streets. It's a never-ending cycle. When Nas came up, he faced it too. Older heads said his flow was too poetic, too different. Now the same thing happens in reverse, with him being the veteran that new rappers think they've outgrown. But what Jim didn't realize is that you can't compare street sound to cultural value. Nas's music doesn't have to be played in every club to matter. It's studied in classrooms, quoted in movies, and tattooed on the minds of lyricists. Illmatic isn't an album, it's a manual. When he said nobody plays Nas, he might have been talking about playlists. But hip-hop took it as an attack on the foundation, and then something interesting happened. Nas fans didn't just argue, they responded through creativity. DJs started blending Nas verses over new school beats. TikTok users began posting Nas versus Jim Jones remixes, cutting between Nas's poetic bars and Jim's flashy Harlem style. It became a new form of hip-hop debate, one that brought both eras to the same stage. Suddenly, the argument wasn't just about disrespect, it was about identity. Meanwhile, industry voices stepped in. Fat Joe called it a generational misunderstanding. Charlemagne Tha God said Jim wasn't wrong, but he said it wrong. Others claimed Jim was playing a dangerous game. Disrespecting Nas might get you attention, but it could also make you look desperate. Behind the scenes, whispers started spreading. Some insiders claimed Cam'ron wasn't happy with Jim's comments. Dipset had already been through its share of internal tension, and this just added more heat. Cam was always the strategist, the one who knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. He wasn't about to let a legacy war drag Dipset's name through the mud again. But the internet was already running wild with theories. Screenshots of old Nas and Cam'ron interviews resurfaced. People digging into every lyric that could be interpreted as a subliminal. And just when it seemed like things might fade, a clip appeared online, an old recording from a backstage interview, where Nas talked about new rappers chasing validation. Some of these guys confuse fame with impact, he said calmly. They think if the club ain't playing you, you don't matter. But time proves everything. Legacy outlives hype. That quote hit like a quiet bomb. It wasn't new, but it resurfaced at the perfect time, spreading like wildfire. Fans started commenting under Jim's posts, copying and pasting Nas's line. Legacy outlives hype. It became a movement. Every time Jim posted a photo, someone dropped that quote in the comments. It was poetic justice. Nas didn't have to say a word. The culture spoke for him. Jim kept pushing forward, trying to spin the narrative, saying he respected Nas but was just keeping it real. Still, deep down, he knew the damage was done. You can't win against a legend who doesn't need to argue. When the older generation stays silent, it feels heavier than any diss track. But one thing about Jim, he's not the type to hide. He's built his whole image on confidence, pride, and survival. He knew that even if people were mad, they were talking about him. And in today's world, conversation equals currency. The more people debated his words, the more relevant he became. Whether they agreed or not didn't matter. The spotlight was on him, and he wasn't going to waste it. That's the paradox of hip-hop. You can be wrong and still win the moment if you own it loud enough. Jim understood that perfectly. The same controversy that made people hate his comment also made them replay his music, check his interviews, and follow his moves. Still, among the fans who really love the culture, there was a feeling that a line had been crossed. Hip-hop was built on competition, sure, but also on respect for those who paved the way. Nas isn't just another rapper. He's a symbol of what artistry means in this genre. When he said, "I never sleep, 'cause sleep is the cousin of death," he wasn't just rapping, he was teaching. His words shaped generations. By the end of the month, people started calling the incident the Nas comment. It became a meme, a moment, a lesson. Younger artists learned that clout chasing can backfire. Older fans were reminded that their heroes still command respect. And for Jim, it became another controversial chapter in his long, unpredictable career. Whether you agreed with him or not, one thing was clear. He had touched a nerve that no one else dared to touch. He forced the world to ask, what does being relevant really mean? Is it about the charts, or is it about legacy? Can someone who shaped the entire direction of rap ever be considered irrelevant, even if you don't hear his songs in the club? Those are the kinds of questions that live forever in hip-hop. And for better or worse, Jim Jones had reignited that conversation as the debate continued to echo through social media, podcasts, and hip-hop circles. Jim Jones found himself standing at a strange crossroads between the truth he believed and the respect he might have risked losing. What started as one comment during a casual live had now become a global hip-hop discussion. Old fans were revisiting Nas's catalog. New fans were questioning what real hip-hop even meant anymore. And industry insiders were quietly choosing sides. It was the kind of storm that no PR plan could control. But the irony was that Jim didn't seem shaken. In interviews that followed, he looked calm, even proud of how much attention his words generated. He said people love to twist things. I didn't diss Nas, I spoke facts. Nas don't make music for the trenches no more, and that's okay. But I do. That statement brought another wave of reactions. Some people applauded him for standing his ground. Others said he still didn't understand what he'd done. Because in hip-hop, there's a difference between being right and being real. Jim represented the streets, the hustler's mindset, the energy of survival. Nas represented the message, the wisdom that comes after surviving. Both were right in their own way, but the internet doesn't do nuance. It wants a villain and a victim, a right and a wrong. And for most fans, Jim had crossed the invisible line of respect. Meanwhile, Nas remained silent, letting the culture speak. His fans did the defending, posting his lyrics, interviews, and awards. Clips of him winning his first Grammy decades into his career resurfaced, showing that his artistry never faded. It only matured. Some even pointed out that Nas's investment in ventures like Mass Appeal and Ring had made him one of the smartest businessmen in the game, proof that legacy wasn't just about bars. It was about growth. The contrast between the two men couldn't be clearer. Jim, the loud hustler from Harlem, feeding off energy and controversy. Nas, the quiet king from Queensbridge, ruling through legacy and consistency. Both shaped hip-hop in their own ways. But they moved on completely different frequencies, as days turned into weeks. The comment lost its shock value, but the conversation kept evolving. Hip-hop journalists started asking deeper questions. Is it fair to measure greatness by street relevance? Should every artist have to adapt to the trends just to stay valid? Or is there beauty in maintaining your lane, your identity, even when the sound shifts? One viral clip summed it up perfectly. A young fan said if nobody in the streets plays Nas, maybe it's because the streets changed, not because Nas fell off. That line became its own quote, reposted thousands of times. And, for the first time, the conversation started turning against Jim. People began realizing that his definition of relevance was limited to what's loud, not what lasts. Inside the industry, though, there was another layer. A few artists privately admitted they understood what Jim meant. They said it's hard to balance artistry with attention because in this new era, numbers talk louder than talent. And maybe that was what Jim was really trying to say. Even if his delivery turned it into a headline instead of a dialogue, by the end of that year, something unexpected happened. Nas dropped another surprise project, working again with Hit Boy, and the timing couldn't have been better. The album wasn't about disses or beef. It was about life, reflection, and maturity. Critics praised it, fans streamed it, and suddenly, Nas was back in the conversation, not as an old legend, but as a current force. That alone was enough of a response. He didn't need to address Jim directly. The music did it for him. Meanwhile, Jim tried to refocus on his own grind. He released new tracks, collaborated with other Harlem artists, and even made jokes about the whole situation. But in every interview, people still brought up that one line. No matter what he did, the question always came back. Do you still think nobody in the streets plays Nas? It had become a permanent part of his narrative. Somewhere deep down, Jim probably respected Nas more than anyone realized. Because to challenge a legend means you recognize his power even if you don't admit it. He had grown up during an era where Nas's voice was everywhere, when Illmatic was the standard for authenticity. Maybe his comment wasn't born from hate but from frustration. Frustration at a game where old-school lyricism doesn't get the shine it deserves anymore. And where being street famous doesn't always translate to mainstream success. There's a strange kind of irony in that. Jim was talking about relevance. Yet Nas proved that true relevance isn't about being loud, it's about being lasting. Nas's music doesn't just live in playlists, it lives in memory, in moments, in history. That's something even viral fame can't compete with. As fans continued to debate, something beautiful happened within the chaos. A new wave of young listeners went back to discover Nas's classics. Streams for Illmatic, Stillmatic, and Godson skyrocketed for a while. Teenagers who weren't even alive when those albums dropped were now quoting his bars on social media. It was proof that controversy might distort the truth. But it also has a strange way of keeping legends alive. And Jim. He remained unapologetic. In his own way, he kept the culture talking, and that's something hip-hop always rewards. Because love him or hate him, Jim Jones understands one thing better than most. Attention is the new currency. If they're still talking about you, you're still relevant. Even if it's for the wrong reasons. The dust may have settled, but the question remains, what defines a rapper's legacy? Is it how often you're played or how deeply you're remembered? Is it about the charts or about the impact that lingers decades later? For Nas, the answer has always been clear. He never needed to chase trends to matter. His music speaks to the soul, not the algorithm. For Jim, maybe the statement was less about disrespect and more about the constant pressure artists feel to stay visible in a world that forgets fast. But no matter how you interpret it, that one sentence, "Nobody in the streets plays Nas," became a mirror. It reflected not just Jim's mindset, but the state of hip-hop itself. A culture caught between its golden roots and its digital present. A reminder that legends and hustlers might live in the same world, but they speak very different languages. And in the end, maybe that's what keeps hip-hop alive. The tension between past and present, the arguments between respect and relevance, the fire that never dies. Because without that clash, without that constant dialogue between eras, the game would stop evolving. Jim Jones sparked a conversation that reminded the world why Nas matters. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most poetic twist of all. And there you have it. Fam, one comment, one moment, and a whole culture divided. Jim Jones said it out loud. Nobody in the streets plays Nas. But after everything we've seen, heard, and broken down, maybe the real question isn't who's being played. It's who's still being remembered. Because when the dust settles, legends don't chase relevance. Relevance chases them. So what do you think? Was Jim Jones just keeping it real and speaking for the new generation? Or did he cross a line that no rapper should ever step over, the line of respect for hip-hop's pioneers? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to hear from both sides, the new school and the old heads, who still ride for ILLMATIC. And if you made it this far, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications because trust me, the next story I'm working on will take this debate to a whole new level. This isn't just music talk anymore. This is hip-hop history unfolding live. From Harlem to Queensbridge, from clout to legacy. The conversation never stops here. I'll catch you in the next one where the truth always hits harder than the beat. Stay locked in, because in this game, every word counts. Word counts.